Hey guys, today's story, where we will delve into one of the most painful yet significant chapters in American history. This story is not just about those who endured unimaginable suffering, but also about the legacies they left behind for us. Join me as we uncover the mysteries of the past to gain a deeper understanding of the invaluable lessons it holds. On May 15th, 2025, a fire engulfed the Nottoway Plantation, one of the grandest symbols of wealth in the American South. The entire house, with its towering columns, gilded chandeliers, and lavish parlors, was reduced to ashes. But behind this beauty lay a heartbreaking truth, a history of cruelty embedded in the bodies of thousands of enslaved individuals who endured unimaginable suffering and exploitation for decades. Today, we will peel back the layers of grandeur and confront the painful story hidden behind the Nottoway Plantation. To understand the dark history of the Nottoway Plantation, we must travel back to the Antebellum period, from the War of 1812 until the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861. During this time, Southern agriculture experienced tremendous growth, driven by global demand for crops like cotton, tobacco, rice, and especially sugar. Plantations capitalized on these lucrative crops to amass wealth and gain political and social influence. Sugar became one of the most profitable crops, and Louisiana was perfectly suited for its cultivation. However, the sweetness of these sugar fields concealed a brutal truth. The process of growing and harvesting sugar required a massive labor force and extremely harsh working conditions. The lives of the enslaved individuals on sugar plantations were not just long days of labor. They were experiences of unimaginable suffering and pain. They had no control over their lives, and all they endured were whippings, hunger, and relentless beatings. Each day began before dawn. The sound of the bell would signal the start of another grueling workday. Men, women, and even children were forced to work under the scorching sun with sharp machetes in hand, cutting sugarcane stalks that were as hard as steel. Sugarcane was not an easy crop to grow or harvest. Each mature stalk could grow several feet tall and had to be cut by hand. The cane had a thick, tough skin that required immense strength to cut. The enslaved people worked in the oppressive heat, sweat pouring down their faces while their hands bled from the sharp stalks. After harvesting, the sugarcane was hauled to the mills where dangerous machinery awaited them. The enslaved workers had to operate heavy presses and enormous cauldrons filled with boiling sugar juice. These jobs were incredibly dangerous as the machines were unsafe and prone to causing serious injuries, burns, or even death. If one were to fall into the boiling cauldrons, they would endure horrific burns, or worse, they would die. No one could save them, and no one would care for their injuries. Life on a sugar plantation was a never-ending cycle of pain. The enslaved individuals had no say in their work hours or conditions. Everything was decided by the plantation owners. Overseers showed no mercy. Any worker who failed to meet quotas was beaten mercilessly. Whippings and brutal beatings became routine, not just as punishment, but as a way to keep the workers fearful and submissive. Sometimes the enslaved had to work from dawn until late at night, when their bodies had no strength left. Meanwhile, the physical pain was not all. The mental anguish of enslaved people was just as overwhelming. They lived in squalid, cramped quarters with no proper food or clean water. Families were torn apart, and they lived in constant fear of being sold away. For the enslaved, there was no love, no warmth of family, only loneliness and prolonged suffering. They never knew if they would ever see their loved ones again. Physical wounds might heal with time, but the psychological scars would never fade. The enslaved people lost not only their health and lives, but also their dignity and freedom. They were seen as mere tools of labor, not human beings, stripped of every right, living in a state of despair they could never escape. One memorable story is of a woman named Sarah who lived on the Nottoway Plantation. Sarah was separated from her family when she was only 15 years old. Her mother was sold away when Sarah was very young, and she never had the chance to see her mother again. She lived in solitude and despair, fighting daily just to survive. Her job was to cut sugarcane and operate the sugar press, a job that was not only exhausting but also dangerous. The cuts on her hands from the machetes were never treated, and each time they did not heal, they served as a reminder that she was nothing more than a tool in the hands of the plantation owner. Sarah recalled the dark nights when she and her fellow slaves lay in their dimly lit quarters with no beds or blankets for warmth. Everyone was exhausted, starving, and had no hope for a better tomorrow. They lived in tiny homes with little light or air to breathe. Sarah often heard the silent cries of children who didn't understand why they were trapped in such tiny, cramped spaces, wondering why they weren't loved and cared for, like other children. Sarah also remembered the times she was beaten for not meeting the work quota. The overseers had no compassion. If a slave was slow or made a mistake, they would be whipped. Sarah's arms and back bore the marks of these brutal punishments, but those physical wounds were nothing compared to the emotional scars she endured. She would never have the chance to live as a real human being. She was always looking around, terrified that one day she would be sold away, torn from the people she loved. This was the reality the enslaved had to live with, an invisible fear that kept them from ever dreaming of a life of freedom. Another story is of William, an older enslaved man who had worked on the sugar plantation for nearly 30 years. William had witnessed many horrific things, from fellow slaves being beaten to others dying from illness or accidents during labor. But what William could never forget was the day his wife was sold away. They had been together for many years and had several children. But one day his wife was taken to be sold, and William never saw her again. This loss was a profound pain he could never shake, losing the one he loved the most with no way to stop it. Their children were also taken and sold to other plantations, and William could only watch this separation, unable to reunite with his family. These stories are not just painful memories of a few individuals, but represent the lives of millions of enslaved people across southern plantations. They lived in desperation, hardship, and always faced the threat of being separated from their families, beaten, and treated like creatures without value. While their physical wounds might eventually heal, the emotional scars they carried would never fade, a painful reminder of a dark past that cannot be forgotten. After the Union's victory in the Civil War, 1861 to 1865, the United States entered a period of profound change, especially for the southern plantations. The Union's victory was not just the end of the war, but also a turning point in the liberation of millions of enslaved people and the complete transformation of Southern society and economy. Before the Civil War, the Southern economy relied heavily on slavery and plantations growing cotton, sugar, and other valuable crops. This system entirely depended on the unpaid labor of enslaved individuals, and the plantation owners in the South became the wealthy and powerful elite. With the Union's victory and the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, those enslaved, once seen as property and without rights, were freed and recognized as citizens with rights. However, this liberation did not bring real freedom to the enslaved. Instead, it brought a series of new challenges. Plantation owners, particularly wealthy ones like John Hampton Randolph of the Nottoway Plantation, now faced a grim reality. Their free labor force had vanished. The economic structure of the South collapsed rapidly, as there was not enough labor to maintain agricultural production. With the loss of free labor, plantation owners like Randolph faced a financial crisis. Their plantations became unsustainable as they lacked the manpower to plant and harvest crops. Sugar plantations, which required an enormous and constant labor force, could not continue operating effectively, leading many plantation owners to go bankrupt. The southern plantation owners refused to accept this loss and began searching for new methods to maintain their profits. One common system that emerged after the war was sharecropping. Under this system, black families were allowed to rent land to farm and pay a portion of their harvest to the landowners. However, in practice, sharecropping did not provide true freedom to the laborers. Instead, it quickly became another system of exploitation, where black farmers became trapped in a cycle of debt. The Southern economy, which had relied on agriculture and enslaved labor, suffered severe decline after the Civil War. Plantation owners not only lost their labor force, but also faced the collapse of an economic system that had lasted for generations. The Southern farmers could not easily transition to new industries, as their production and trade systems were no longer effective. Furthermore, after the war, the South had to endure mental and emotional wounds that could never be measured. The families of plantation owners, once powerful and wealthy, now felt overwhelmed, losing their position of dominance in society. They faced a new reality where former slaves were now considered free citizens with rights and could participate in society, despite the efforts of the plantation owners to maintain racial discrimination and power. The effects of the Union victory went beyond economic change. They also led to significant shifts in education and opportunities for Black people. While freedom was not immediate or complete, the liberation of slaves opened doors for Black individuals to access education and participate in politics. However, plantation owners continued to maintain racial segregation through discriminatory policies, preventing many Black people from achieving the rights they truly deserved. The Union's victory was not just the end of a war. It marked a fundamental shift in the social, political, and economic structure of the South. While plantation owners and those in power tried to maintain their wealth and control, the reality was that the South could never return to its old ways. The consequences of the war were not just the loss of lives, but the fundamental transformation of how the Southern economy operated. Alongside the economic changes, efforts to eliminate racial discrimination and build a more just society also created tensions between social groups. The wounds of war were not only physical but also deeply psychological, leading to a constant struggle between embracing change and protecting old values. Finally, after centuries of suffering, the Nottoway Plantation could no longer withstand the changes of history. On May 15, 2025, a fire completely consumed the house, destroying a symbol of wealth built on exploitation and pain. The death of the Nottoway Plantation was not just the loss of a grand architectural structure, but a symbolic moment, a purging of a dark legacy. The fire didn't just destroy walls and columns, it burned away the illusion, revealing the harsh truth of the slave system behind it. Though the Nottoway Plantation was burned, the stories of the enslaved and their lives of exploitation will never be forgotten. The cruelty of slavery and its consequences are deeply ingrained in history, and we cannot let those pains be erased. We must confront the truth, no matter how hard it may be, so that we can better understand what happened and ensure that history does not repeat itself. The story of the Nottoway Plantation, like many others, is a reminder that behind every grand building, every wealth accumulated, there is often a hidden price. A price not in gold or luxury, but in the lives of those who were robbed of their freedom, their dreams shattered, and their humanity stripped away. The consequences of slavery were not just economic, but also a continuous struggle in American society to eliminate injustices, racial discrimination, and to acknowledge the pain suffered by the enslaved. The enslaved people lost so much, but their legacy, spiritual strength, resilience, and desire for freedom remains forever. And for us to move forward, we must confront the past, learn from these mistakes, and build a fairer future for all. When the fire consumed a symbol of cruel wealth, it also gave us an opportunity to change. An opportunity to not only honor those who sacrificed, but also to learn from the past, to create a society where no one has to live in fear or oppression, and where all people have the chance to live a life of freedom and dignity. Thank you for following the story of the Nottoway Plantation and the marks of cruelty left by history. While the fire has consumed a part of the past, we cannot let it obscure the important lessons we must learn from it. The enslaved people lived in pain and sacrifice to create the values we face today, and we must confront, understand, and appreciate those lessons. Through stories like this, we have the opportunity to face the past, understand what happened, and recognize the importance of building a just and humane society. The story of the Nottoway Plantation is just a small part of the long and painful history of slavery and what it has left for future generations. There are many untold stories, forgotten lives, and valuable lessons that we must continue to explore. We can look toward other famous plantations like Whitney Plantation, where the truth of slavery is not distorted, or the stories of enslaved people who rebelled, fought against cruelty, and fought for freedom. We can also learn about the difficult journeys of African Americans in reintegrating into society after liberation, the challenges they faced, and the struggles of civil rights movements in the 20th century. Each story will be a piece of the puzzle that helps us understand more about history, human values, and the ongoing struggle to build a better world. Let us continue to seek out these stories, not only to remember the past, but also to learn from it so that we can create a brighter future for the next generation. See you in the next story.